Crunch you a little if I see Karen come in. So with that said, about 20 minutes. Please welcome first presenter, Ryan Kohler.
Good morning, everybody. So yes, my name is Ron Kohler, and I just about finished at Capella University, which though it is headquartered here in Minneapolis, they don't have any teaching buildings. So I've actually never been to a Capella building. It's all online. And we meet face-to-face from time to time, so there is face-to-face interactions, and it was definitely hard. I also work with a guy named Rick Fenwick, and our firm is, we call it Fenwick Kohler Associates. Last year I did present the theory behind the dissertation study that I did, and so now I'm back to present the results because a certain someone got right in my face and says, this better be done by next year. I think you know that person. She's calling herself Henry Williams. I think you know who that was. So this was me 20 years ago with Kathy Gambon. That was the day I graduated.
That's you?
That's me. All the hair, the glowing locks. That was the day I graduated from
Ryan,
college.
you're back down to 15 to 18 minutes.
Okay, no problem.
Thank you, Karen.
Graduated from college that day, and so I was lucky enough to learn, imagine that, learning from Kathy Danneman while you're still an undergraduate. I was so lucky. I mean, it was just awesome. And because of that, I've gotten to do work with so many well-known companies. I've just had a truly wonderful career thus far. There's a lot of people that helped me put this study together. That Rick Fenwick, he got me into it. He got my committee folks, which were wonderful at Capella, the IO program, and I can't say enough good things. Diana Wong from Eastern, she's also our treasurer here for Midwest Academy. Greg Husko from Eastern. There's a guy named James LeBreton that without him, I couldn't do any of the nonlinear statistics. He made it so easy, and I'm going to share those resources with you. And then, of course, I put Teresa and Peter because after my wife had a child and after Kathy passed away about 10 years ago, I just sort of went into hiding, did local work in Detroit and did a lot of training work. And last year I'm back. And they welcomed me. I was very fortunate to do that presentation last year and glad to do it again this year. So the 3 points that I hope you'll get out of this, and I'll come back to at the end, is resistance is no longer change's biggest enemy. For the last 20 years, everything, in fact, research-wise, since the 60s, resistance is bad. Resistance to change is bad. Well, there's something worse, actually, than resistance to change that's going to be easier to tackle. Easy and hard. Easy to spot and recognize, but what do we do about it? That's going to be difficult. Too much of a good thing is a bad thing. There's been great IO research in the last 3-4 years talking about this. There's a ceiling effect. If you think about test performance and anxiety, for example. If I don't care, I'm not going to do well. But if I get too stressed out, I'm not going to do well. It's that curvilinear in between. Well, commitment to change is the same way. And then the last thing is, nonlinear statistics portray organizational phenomena like behavior more accurately than linear statistics. And it's not that difficult to do. I mean, I had trouble understanding linear statistics. The nonlinear statistics, there were more hurdles to getting it done, but once you see how easy it is, I'm hoping a lot of you will start to, as you design your studies, give nonlinearity a chance. So I'm going to go through just the basics of what's my topic, a little bit of the literature supporting it, my methods, the results, the conclusion. You have to build your work on someone else's work. You can't just make up a survey when you're going in to do research, which I didn't know. I was a practitioner for many years. And luckily there's a guy named John Meyer from the University of Western Ontario. And he's got what he calls a 3-component model of commitment. There's affective commitment, which is desire. I call it desire commitment. There's normative commitment, which is guilt obligation type commitment. And the last one, a little bit harder to figure out, is based on Becker's side bet theory. Continuance commitment, it's a little bit like fear. I have so much invested in this place that it just wouldn't be worth it for me to resist this change. So those are 3 different types of commitment. Luckily, he started out doing organizational commitment research, and right around 99, 2000, he had a grad student that said, you know what, somebody can be committed to the organization. My father worked at Ford for 40 years. He's definitely committed to that place. But there were others. ups and downs. Depending on the different change initiatives they had going, his commitment would go up or down. Well, they wanted to start to integrate behavior into this, and they created a scale called the Behavioral Support for Change, which is just aggressive resistance, passive resistance, compliance, cooperation, champion. If you think of resistance to commitment as one scale, it's one thing to, boy, I'm really mad about this, and I'll talk to you the night before we go into the meeting, but we get in the meeting and they say, Ron, are you on board with this change? Yes, sir. So what I feel may be different than what I do. So the behavioral component's important. Last year, our research team with some Canadians and Australians took Myers affective scale and did it with combined it with a scale that they deemed to be enrolled performance, and found out that there is indeed a ceiling effect to affective commitment. So if I don't have much commitment, my performance is low. When I start to get more committed to something, my performance goes up. But there's something called overcommitment, and I'll get into that, where I care so much about this and I want this to happen so bad and it's not happening, that the wheels start coming off. I just either get frustrated, I start exhibiting things that is actually a bridge that looks more like resistance than commitment. Leon Coetzee is a gentleman from South Africa. He works, he's a great scholar practitioner. He works a lot with Barry Johnson, actually, who wrote Polarity Management, was involved in this organization many years ago, and Barry's a wonderful person too. And the way Leon thinks about it is, if you think about him going up the commitment ladder, so to speak, I get to this overcommitment. He sees it as a bridge to resistance. I was so committed with this, but the change, it started to take a left turn. It started to evolve. It got to be not the same change that we started out doing. And I went from being the biggest cheerleader to now behind the scenes starting to exhibit these resistance type behaviors. He had this as a model. Nobody ever collected data on it. I'm not saying I collected data on this, but I can say that the data I collected will make a case for this being a model that's more accurate than that linear scale that you see. This was a model that a gentleman by the name of Roland Loop, who was a partner at Kathy Dannemiller's. Roland and I were doing work in the late 90s and used this with a client. And I actually collected some data, but not in a scholarly way. We were saying, if we think about things from not the change agents or the leaders, but I'm a change recipient. I'm the person you want to make all these changes happen. Real different perspective. So if I'm a change recipient, if I'm the individual, how do I go through a change? Well, I understand it, I become aware of it. Through participation, I either believe or don't believe in it. If I don't believe this change is good for me or good for the organization, I'll either resist, or worse yet, I'll just comply. I'll give the minimal effort I can so that I'm not going to get fired. But it's not something you want from an organizational change standpoint. However, if I believe in it and I have enough participation, not too much participation, but again, just the right amount, I can be committed. Again, nice model. Where's the data? Where's the data? And that was what I intended to do. So the first hypothesis was that compliance will outnumber resistance. You're going to have more people exhibiting compliance behaviors, which are different than resistance. The second hypothesis was, as I look at each of these three components of commitment as a predictor of this behavioral support, that each of those independently will have that curvilinear relationship. They'll have a ceiling effect. Too much of any type of commitment can be a bad thing. And then lastly, and this is where it gets into the very difficult or complex thinking about nonlinearity, do these happen independently? I mean, if you commit to something that you're going to do, is there a little bit of obligation? Is there a little bit, well, I like it? Is there a degree of, well, yeah, I have been here for a while, it's not really worth it? It's not like you partition those out and do them differently. Those happen simultaneously, so how do we take a look at that simultaneously? Because linear statistics don't do well with looking at things simultaneously. And that's what I really wanted to look at. So here's what I came up with the practical results of. And this is just looking at affective commitment. And I did a random sample of as close as I could get to Fortune 500 companies in the United States. And I used SurveyMonkey to do that, their audience service, which was fabulous, to be able to get that random sample. And it was for a particular change initiative that you're going through. What is your level of commitment in terms of, I want this change to happen, I don't want this change to happen. And that's the degree here. And then along the bottom there, you see the behavioral support. Where do you put yourself on the, this is what I think about the change, but here's my actual behavior. So people up in this quadrant, they are cooperating, championing the behavior, and they want the change to happen. That's good. That's what we, as change agents and change leaders, that's the type of behavior we want. People over here are either aggressive resistance, passive resistance, whether they want the change to happen or not. And this is what we traditionally think of, we got to get rid of resistance. We got to root out the resistance. Well, only 15% of people exhibited what we would deem resistance. 37% came up with what we would consider to be great commitment type behavior. In this middle number, 49%, the actual compliance number is 32%. You have this 17% right here, which are people who don't want the change. They think it's bad, but they have to act like I support it. And I would guess that these are higher people in the organization. If you're a manager, for example, imagine if you're a manager of a retail store, lots of stores around here. You have a lot of corporate initiatives going on. You say, yep, we have to do this. You tell the employees, hey, we need to do this. And you tell everyone, yep, we're going to do this the right way. My wife went to the, what is it, DSW shoes. They say, next shoe lover in line. If you love shoes, that's fine. If I had to work there, that would be very hard for me to say. Okay? But if I was the manager of that store, I'd say, oh yeah, this shoe lover thing, we got to do it. I think, and I can't say for sure, but that's how I would guess these people are here. I think this model right here has great promise for us as practitioners, because we have conversations with clients about resistance. We have conversations about commitment, but what about this ambivalence, this middle ground? How are we driving people there, and how do we get them out? The second hypothesis then had to do with that curvilinearity, and we found that with the affective commitment and behavioral support. If you look at this scatter plot without the line, it's not linear. I can't say it's perfectly curvilinear. SPSS did choose that, but you could say that this is not linear. You could definitely say it's non-linear. Here's the hard part, is if you think of a bigger circle, that's behavioral support, and red is affective commitment, green is normative commitment, and blue is continuance commitment. How do we partition down those different areas? How much of the commitment is happening because of, 2 minutes?
Yep.
How much of this can I partition down because of the simultaneity of it? And here's, I'll do it real quick. If you think of affective commitment, how much of it has to do with behavioral support? You think of normative commitment. We have a two-way interaction. Seems simple enough. I can do this with linear statistics. The problem comes if I add in a third variable. If I add in a third variable, well, we know that third variable is responsible for some of the contributions in this white area right here. But because of the way linear statistics are, they can only explain additive contributions. You can't really explain what's happening. If I were to do a stepwise regression, I can only tell here's the additional change in the variance that the continuance commitment is making. Well, we know that these little areas are going on. Linear statistics just can't tell you. Can't tell you what's happening in those areas. Luckily, this James LeBreton, he was with Purdue, he's now with Penn State. He's building on relative weight analysis and trying to figure it out. To make things even more complicated with this particular study, is continuance commitment is actually maxed. If you take a look at the affective commitment and normative commitment, and then take a look at all three of them together, the linear SPSS says, nope, throw continuance commitment out, because it's not adding anything from a linear standpoint. Why? Because it isn't. It's not adding anything in here, but it is adding because of curvilinearity. It is that portion where it's starting to bring it down. We know intuitively that it's responsible for that. So how much of that is it responsible for? That's what those statistics from LeBreton helped us to see and find out, is how do we partition down? Because what the big finding was, is you would think, well, that continuance commitment, researchers continuously throw it out. What we found out is the two-way interaction between affective and continuance was double the two-way interaction between guilt commitment and continuance commitment, which was very surprising. Nobody would have expected that at all. So again, practitioners, stop worrying about resistance so much, start paying attention to compliance ambivalence. Researchers, to run the curvilinear regression, all you need to do is create a new predictor term and square the variables. And run a linear regression with the squared variables. That's a nonlinear regression. That begs the question of how much commitment or resistance is optimal versus suboptimal, and what types of commitment or resistance are optimal or suboptimal. And the last thing is this website, and I'll put this up somewhere. This is where you have the tools. Without these tools, no way could I have done this study. I mean, these guys are fabulous. James LeBreton and Davidson and a couple other people. So again, just to close out, resistance is not our biggest enemy. Compliance ambivalence is. I mean, people care enough to resist, care enough to commit, but if they don't, I believe that's what's hurting us. Too much of a good thing, commitment can be bad, and then the nonlinear statistics help you more accurately see what's happening. And in this case, we can see, and for future research, don't throw out that cost commitment. It's just as important as the other two. How it shows up, though, is different.